Welcome back, guys, to Battleground Stories. Before we start the video, hit that subscribe button. Thank you. I am Sergeant David Morrison, and I am going to talk about something the United States Air Force has been trying to keep secret for 60 years. What happened in the Socorro region of New Mexico on April 24, 1964, was not a UFO sighting. It was something much worse. It was something that caused trained soldiers to question everything they knew about reality, their duties, and whether we are truly alone in this universe. I was stationed at White Sands Missile Range, about 75 miles southeast of Socorro. I was 26 years old, had been in the Air Force for 8 years, and was a security guard at some of the most sensitive military facilities in the country. White Sands was where we tested missiles, conducted weapons research, and pushed the boundaries of aviation technology. It was also a place where strange events occurred with an unsettling regularity, even if we didn't talk about it openly. Objects in the sky that moved in ways nothing man-made could move. Radar contacts that appeared and disappeared without explanation. Equipment malfunctions that coincided with sightings of lights over the desert. Most of us had seen something at one point or another. We just didn't discuss it. You learned quickly that reporting anomalies was a fast track to a psych evaluation, and a desk job April 24th started as a routine day. I was assigned to a mobile patrol with Corporal James Parker, checking perimeter roads and monitoring for any unauthorized activity around the test range boundaries. Parker was 23, from Oklahoma, been in the service for 4 years. Good soldier, steady under pressure, the kind of guy you wanted watching your back. We'd been on patrol since 1400 hours, driving the endless dirt roads that crisscross the missile range, checking fence lines, investigating tracks in the sand. The afternoon was hot, pushing into the high 70s, with that crystal-clear desert air that made distances deceptive. You could see for miles, but judging how far something was became nearly impossible. Around 1730 hours, we received a radio call from base. A local police officer from Socorro had reported seeing some kind of explosion or landing west of town. Command wanted us to investigate, make sure it wasn't related to any of our operations, authorized or otherwise. The coordinates put it about 10 miles northwest of our position, on the far edge of the range boundaries. Probably kids with fireworks, Parker said as we turned onto the highway heading toward Socorro. Or someone's meth lab blowing up. I wasn't so sure. Something about the report bothered me. The description of a blue-orange flame descending toward the ground didn't match fireworks or an explosion. It sounded controlled, deliberate. We made it to Socorro in 20 minutes, driving faster than we probably should have. The town was small, maybe 6,000 people, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and strangers were noticed immediately. We spotted the police vehicle parked on a dirt road leading southwest out of town and pulled up beside it. Officer Jack Reynolds climbed out of his patrol car as we approached. He was maybe late 20s, local cop, and his face was pale despite the desert tan. His hands were shaking slightly as he pointed toward the arroyo beyond the rise. "It's still there," he said, his voice tight. "Whatever it is, it's still there." "What did you see?" I asked. "I don't know how to describe it." Reynolds wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cooling evening air. Some kind of craft, white, egg-shaped. And there were things, 2 of them, small, wearing white suits. Parker and I exchanged glances. This wasn't kids with fireworks. "Show us," I said. We followed Reynolds' vehicle up the dirt road, bouncing over ruts and around rocks. The terrain was typical high desert, scattered mesquite and greasewood, red dirt, an endless sky. As we crested the rise, Reynolds stopped and pointed down into the shallow arroyo below. That's when I saw it. The object sat about 150 yards away, gleaming white in the late afternoon sun. It was roughly egg-shaped, standing vertically, maybe 15 feet tall. Smooth surface, no visible seams or markings. But what made my blood run cold were the 2 figures beside it. They were small, maybe 4 feet tall, wearing what looked like one-piece white coveralls, but their proportions were all wrong. The heads were too large, the bodies too thin, the way they moved was too fluid, too quick. They were working on something at the base of the object, their movements precise and purposeful. "Jesus Christ," Parker whispered beside me. I raised my binoculars, trying to get a better look. Through the lenses, details became clearer and more disturbing. The figures' suits weren't cloth. They were too smooth, too reflective. And their heads, I could see them now, in profile, were definitely not human large, rounded, with what might have been large dark eyes. One of the figures turned in our direction. Even from this distance, even through binoculars, I felt like it was looking directly at me, looking through me. An intelligence assessing, calculating, deciding, "We need to call this in," I said, lowering the binoculars. My hands were steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Right now." Before Parker could reach for the radio, the sound started. It began low, almost subsonic, a vibration you felt in your chest rather than heard with your ears. Then it built, climbing in pitch and volume until it became a roar that made conversation impossible. The figures moved, not walking but gliding, covering the distance to the object in seconds that defied physics. The object began to glow, not the white of reflected sunlight, but an internal luminescence that shifted through colors blue, orange, a brilliant white that hurt to look at directly. The roar intensified, and then with a blast of displaced air that rocked our vehicles, the object lifted. It didn't launch. It didn't accelerate. One moment it was on the ground, the next it was 50 feet up, hovering motionless. The landing area beneath it showed scorch marks, radiating out from 4 indentation points where legs or supports had rested. "Get on the radio," I told Parker, unable to take my eyes off the hovering craft. "Tell base we have an unidentified object, possible threat, requesting immediate support." Parker fumbled with the radio handset, his voice cracking as he made the report. I could hear the confusion in the dispatcher's response, the disbelief, the request for confirmation. But I wasn't paying attention to the conversation anymore. The object was moving not away as I'd hoped, toward us. It drifted across the arroyo with a speed that seemed wrong for something that size. No sound now except for a low hum that made my teeth ache. The luminescence pulsed, rhythmic, like breathing or a heartbeat. Blue, orange, white, repeating in a pattern that felt almost hypnotic. "Back to the vehicles," I ordered, "now." We scrambled for the Jeep as Reynolds ran for his patrol car. I was behind the wheel, key in the ignition, when the object stopped directly overhead. The hum intensified, and the light bathed everything in harsh white brilliance that cast no shadows. Then something happened that I still can't fully explain. The air changed. It became thick, resistant, like trying to breathe through water. My skin prickled with static electricity, every hair on my body stood up, and I felt something probing at the edges of my mind. Not words, not thoughts exactly, but pressure. An intelligence reaching toward me, trying to make contact or assess me or something I couldn't understand. Parker was screaming. I could see his mouth open, see the terror on his face, but I couldn't hear him over the hum that had become all-encompassing. Reynolds had collapsed against his vehicle, hands pressed to his head. Time became fluid. Seconds stretched into hours or compressed into instants. I was aware of the object above us, aware of that probing presence, aware that something fundamental about reality had just shifted, and I was helpless to do anything about it. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The light dimmed, the hum faded, the pressure in my skull released with an almost physical pop that left my ears ringing. The object shot away, not gradually accelerating, but instantly somewhere else, streaking southwest toward the mountains at a speed that should have generated a sonic boom, but produced only since, within seconds, it was gone, vanished into the darkening sky. I sat in the driver's seat, hands still gripping the steering wheel, trying to remember how to breathe. Parker was beside me, pale and shaking, Reynolds remained slumped against his patrol car, staring at the sky with an expression I'd seen before on soldiers who'd seen too much combat. "What the hell was that?" Parker finally whispered. I didn't have an answer. My watch showed 1,750 hours. Only 5 minutes had passed since we'd first spotted the object, but it felt like a lifetime. Everything felt different now. Wrong somehow, like the world had shifted slightly off its axis, and nothing would ever quite line up correctly again. The radio crackled. Base dispatch, demanding a situation report. Parker picked up the handset with trembling hands and tried to explain what we'd witnessed. I could hear the skepticism in the dispatcher's voice, the careful questions designed to determine if we were injured or suffering from heat exhaustion or having some kind of breakdown. "Send someone out here," I cut in, taking the handset from Parker. "Send whoever handles this kind of thing and tell them to bring Geiger counters and cameras. This site needs to be documented now before evidence is compromised." There was a long pause on the other end. Then a different voice came through, older, with the authority of senior rank. "Sergeant Morrison, this is Colonel Bradford. Secure the site. Allow no civilians in or out. We're dispatching a team. ETA 30 minutes. Do not discuss what you saw with anyone. That's an order. Acknowledge." "Acknowledge, sir." The radio went silent. I looked at Parker, then at Reynolds, who had finally pushed himself upright and was walking unsteadily toward us. "They're sending people," I told the officer. "Military investigation team. You'll need to give a statement." Reynolds nodded slowly. His eyes kept drifting back to the arroyo, to the spot where the object had been. "This really happened, right? I didn't imagine it." "It happened," Parker said. "We all saw it." But even as I confirmed it, part of me was already questioning. The memory felt slippery, like trying to hold water in your hands. Details were there, but they kept shifting, rearranging themselves. Had the object been 15 feet tall, or 20? Had there been 2 figures, or 3? How long had we been under that light? "We need to check the landing site," I said, pushing aside the confusion. "Document what we can before the team arrives." We approached the arroyo carefully, weapons drawn, though I wasn't sure what good an M16 would do against something that could move, like that object had moved. The sun was setting now, painting the desert in shades of orange and red that made the scorch marks stand out in stark relief. 4 indentations marked where the object had rested. Each was roughly circular, about a foot across, pressed maybe 4 inches into the hard-packed earth. The soil around them was fused, turned to something like glass by intense heat radiation burns maybe, or something else. Between the indentations, the ground was disturbed, not just scorched, but altered. The sand had a strange texture, almost metallic, and when I touched it, my fingers came away with a residue that felt oily, but left no visible trace. Parker was photographing everything with his service camera, clicking through shots methodically. Reynolds walked the perimeter, measuring distances, taking notes. We were professionals, trained to document and report. But underneath that training was fear. Pure, primal terror at what we'd just encountered. "Sergeant," Parker called from the center of the landing zone, "you need to see this." I walked over to where he stood, pointing at one of the indentations in Hoyt. Pressed into the fused soil was a marking. Not random damage. Deliberate. A symbol. It looked like an arrow pointing upward, with a horizontal line across the shaft and a semicircle at the base. Simple, geometric, but somehow deeply unsettling, like looking at words in a language you don't know, but sensing the meaning anyway. "What is it?" Parker asked. "I don't know, but photograph it. Every angle. Command will want to see this." As Parker worked, I heard vehicles approaching, multiple engines coming fast. The investigation team arriving ahead of schedule. I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Relief that someone else would take responsibility for this. Apprehension about what would happen next, what questions would be asked, what answers would be accepted. 3 military vehicles pulled up at the top of the rise, Men in uniform climbed out, along with several individuals in civilian clothes carrying cases of equipment. A captain approached, his expression unreadable. "Sergeant Morrison, I'm Captain Henry Wallace, Air Force Intelligence. I need you and Corporal Parker to come with me. Officer Reynolds, you'll need to give a statement as well." "The landing site," I started to say, "is being secured as we speak. Your job now is to tell me exactly what happened. Everything you saw, in as much detail as you can remember." We were separated, taken to different vehicles. The interviews lasted hours, the same questions asked in different ways, checking for inconsistencies, probing for any sign we were lying or mistaken or suffering from some kind of shared delusion. But they never once suggested we hadn't seen something real. It was after midnight when they finally let us go. Parker and I were driven back to White Sands in silence, no debriefing, no explanation, just a stern reminder that what we'd witnessed was classified, that discussing it with anyone, including each other, would result in court-martial. I lay in my barracks that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind, the object, the figures, that presence in my head. And I knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't over. Whatever had landed near Socorro wasn't just passing through. It had been looking for something. And somehow, I had the terrible feeling it had found it. Sleep didn't come that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that symbol burned into the desert floor. The arrow pointing upward, the horizontal line, the semicircle, it meant something. I knew it meant something, even if I couldn't understand what. At 05:30 hours, I was pulled from my bunk by 2 MPs. No explanation, just orders to report to the base commander's office. Immediately, Parker was already there when I arrived, along with Officer Reynolds, who looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands still trembling slightly as he held a cup of coffee. Colonel Thomas Bradford sat behind his desk, a man in his late 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of face that had seen too many things that didn't make sense. Beside him stood Captain Wallace, the intelligence officer from the previous night, and another man I didn't recognize. Civilian clothes, government-issue briefcase, the unmistakable bearing of someone from Washington. "Gentlemen," Bradford began without preamble, "what you witnessed yesterday has been classified top secret under national security protocols. You are not to discuss it with anyone, not your families, not your friends, not even each other, except in officially sanctioned debriefing sessions. Is that understood?" We nodded. "Good, because as of right now, the situation has escalated." Bradford gestured to the civilian. "This is Mr. Harrison from Project Blue Book. He'll be conducting the official investigation." Harrison opened his briefcase and pulled out several photographs. He spread them across the desk, and my stomach dropped. They were aerial shots of the landing site, taken at dawn. But something was wrong, very wrong. The 4 indentation marks were there, yes, but there were more now. A pattern of smaller marks radiating outward from the original landing zone, as though something had been walking around the site. And in the center, where that symbol had been pressed into the soil, the ground had turned black, not scorched, black, like the soil itself had been transformed into something else. "The radiation readings are off the charts," Harrison said quietly. "Not the kind we get from nuclear material, something else entirely. Our instruments can't even classify it properly." "Radiation?" Parker's voice cracked. "We were standing right there. We walked through that site." "You'll be monitored," Bradford said. "Medical examinations every day for the next month. Blood work, tissue samples. But so far, you show no signs of contamination." "So far?" I repeated. No one answered that question. Harrison pulled out another photograph. This one was a close-up of the symbol in the dawn light. With better resolution, I could see details we'd missed the previous night. The lines weren't just pressed into the soil. They were glowing faintly. A pale blue luminescence that shouldn't exist in burned earth. "We need to know everything," Harrison said. "Every detail. No matter how insignificant it seems, the color of the object, the exact movements of the entities, any sounds, any sensations, everything. So we told him. For the next 3 hours, we recounted every second of the encounter. Harrison took notes in a leather-bound journal, asking questions that grew increasingly specific. How fast did the object move? What was the exact shade of blue in the flame? Did the entities communicate with each other? Did you feel any temperature changes? It was Reynolds who mentioned something I'd forgotten, something my brain had apparently decided to suppress until that moment. There was a moment, the officer said slowly, right before the object lifted off. One of the entities looked at me, and I heard something, not with my ears, in my head, like a voice, but not words, more like pressure, information being pushed into my skull. I felt ice slide down my spine. I felt that too, when the object was directly overhead. Parker nodded. Same. It was like something trying to open a door in my mind. Harrison's pen stopped moving. He exchanged glances with Bradford and Wallace. Did any of you understand what it was trying to communicate? No, I said. But that wasn't entirely true. There had been something, not words, not images, but a feeling. A sense of being measured, assessed. Like I was being evaluated for something and the results would determine what happened next. Gentlemen, Bradford said, standing up. As of this moment, you're confined to base. No phone calls out, no mail, no contact with anyone outside this facility until we determine the scope of this situation. Sir, I protested, my family will be told you're on a classified assignment. That's all they need to know. The meeting ended. We were escorted to isolated quarters in a section of the base I'd never seen before underground. Climate-controlled. The kind of place designed to contain things that shouldn't get out. For the next 2 days, we underwent medical examinations. Blood draws every 6 hours. X-rays. Brain scans. Psychological evaluations that asked the same questions in different ways, looking for signs of mental breakdown or fabrication. The doctors found nothing wrong with us physically, but their expressions grew more concerned with each test result. Your white blood cell counts are elevated, one doctor told me during the 3rd examination, but not in a way consistent with infection or radiation exposure. It's almost like your immune system is responding to something it doesn't recognize, something it doesn't have protocols for. On the 3rd night, at approximately 0200 hours, the alarms went off. I jerked awake in my bunk as red lights flooded the corridor outside. The sirens were deafening, the kind reserved for base-wide emergencies. Incoming attack, breach of security, nuclear incident. Parker burst into my room. Something's happening at the missile silos. White Sands had several underground missile facilities, part of the Strategic Defense Network Minuteman ICBMs, each one capable of delivering nuclear destruction halfway around the world. They were our most secure installations, protected by layers of armed guards, electronic security, and fail-safe systems designed to prevent unauthorized access or launch. Now, according to the frantic radio chatter we could hear echoing through the facility, those systems were failing. All of them, simultaneously. We were herded into a briefing room along with dozens of other personnel. Colonel Bradford stood at the front, his face grim in the emergency lighting. At 0147 hours, Missile Silo Echo 7 reported an unidentified object hovering directly overhead. Within minutes, all electronic systems in the silo went offline. Launch codes became inaccessible. Communications failed. The security team reported seeing the same type of craft witnessed near Socorro 3 days ago. My blood ran cold. Then Echo 4 reported the same phenomenon. Then Echo 2. As of right now, 4 of our 6 missile installations are completely dark. No power, no communications, no ability to launch or even confirm the status of the warheads. Sir, someone asked from the back, could this be an attack? Russian infiltration? If it were Russians, they'd be launching our missiles, not shutting them down. Bradford's jaw tightened. This is something else, and it's spreading. Spreading. The word hung in the air like smoke. Whatever had landed near Socorro hadn't left. It had been scouting, assessing our capabilities, and now it was systematically disabling our nuclear arsenal. Sergeant Morrison, Corporal Parker, Bradford called out. You're with the response team. We need someone who's seen these things before. We were armed with M16 rifles, as though bullets would matter against something that could shut down nuclear missile systems from the sky. The convoy consisted of 6 vehicles carrying 30 heavily armed soldiers, along with mobile radar units and communications equipment. The drive to Echo 7 took 20 minutes. The silo was located in the desert northeast of the main base, a nondescript bunker entrance that led down to a reinforced chamber housing one of the most powerful weapons ever created by man. As we approached, I saw it. The object hovered approximately 200 feet above the silo entrance. It was larger than the one near Socorro, maybe 30 feet in diameter, still egg-shaped but with visible protrusions or appendages extending from the lower portion. The same white luminescence, pulsing rhythmically. And beneath it, the air itself seemed to warp and shimmer, like heat distortion, but more pronounced. Jesus Christ, Parker whispered beside me. The convoy stopped 100 yards out. No one wanted to get closer. We'd all heard what had happened to Morrison and his team. None of us wanted to experience that probing presence. That feeling of being assessed by something utterly alien. Captain Wallace was with us, along with a team of technicians carrying equipment I didn't recognize. They set up quickly, pointing instruments at the hovering craft, recording data on devices that beeped and clicked frantically. Electromagnetic readings are off scale, one technician reported. It's putting out some kind of field that's disrupting everything electronic within a quarter-mile radius. Can we communicate with it? Wallace asked. Communicate? I couldn't hide my disbelief. Sir, that thing just disabled a nuclear missile silo. It's not here for conversation. We don't know what it's here for, Sergeant. That's what we need to find out. Wallace had them set up a radio transmitter, pumping out messages on multiple frequencies, mathematical sequences, binary code, audio greetings in a dozen languages. The object ignored it all, continuing its steady hover above the silo entrance. Then, without warning, it moved. Not away. Down. The object descended slowly, gracefully, until it was directly over the bunker entrance. The hatch that normally required explosive charges to breach simply opened. Like someone had pressed a button from the inside, the massive steel door swung upward on its hinges. Fall back, Wallace ordered, but no one moved. We were transfixed, watching as something that should have been impossible unfolded before our eyes. A beam of light extended from the object down into the open silo. Not like a flashlight, solid, almost physical, like a column of luminous material. And in that light, I saw shapes descending. The same small figures we'd seen near Socorro, gliding down the beam toward the missile chamber below. They're going inside, Parker said. They're going into the silo. Open fire. The order came from somewhere behind us. I never found out who gave it. 30 rifles opened up simultaneously, tracer rounds arcing toward the hovering object. I fired too, my training overriding the rational part of my brain that knew it was futile. The bullet struck the object and stopped. Frozen in midair, suspended in that warped space beneath the craft. They hung there for a moment, glowing red from friction, then simply dropped to the ground like spent brass. The object didn't react. It continued its operation, the beam steady, the figures descending into the silo as though we weren't even worth acknowledging. Then the screaming started. It came from the underground chamber, the security team stationed below, the technicians monitoring the warhead. Their voices crackled over the radio, incoherent with terror words I couldn't make out. drowned in static and something else. A sound that wasn't quite sound, more like pressure against the eardrums. "Echo 7, report," Wallace barked into the radio. "What's happening down there?" For a moment, only silence. Then a voice, strained and barely recognizable. They're touching it. They're touching the warhead. Oh God, they're taking it apart." The transmission cut off. The beam of light retracted. The figures rose back up, still gliding, still moving with that unnatural grace, and as they returned to the object, I saw that one of them was carrying something. A cylindrical object maybe 2 feet long, metallic, glowing with a faint internal light, part of the warhead. They'd extracted part of our nuclear weapon and were taking it with them. The object began to rise, slowly at first, then accelerating. Within seconds, it was a point of light in the night sky. Within 10 seconds, it was gone. We stood in silence, weapons lowered, trying to process what we'd just witnessed. Then Wallace was running toward the bunker entrance and we followed, climbing down the metal ladder into the silo chamber below. The security team was alive, but unresponsive. 4 men sitting against the wall, eyes wide, staring at nothing. In the center of the chamber, the missile stood in its cradle, but something was wrong with it. The casing had been opened, not cut or damaged, but opened as though the seals had simply been released. And inside, where sophisticated nuclear components should have been visible, there was a gap, a missing section where something crucial had been removed with surgical precision. "They disarmed it," one of the technicians said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They took out the plutonium core. This missile is completely inert now." "How?" Wallace demanded. "Those seals require specialized tools, a team of experts working for hours. They did it in less than 3 minutes," I cut in, "and they did it while hovering 200 feet in the air." Reports came in over the radio. The same thing had happened at Echo 4 and Echo 2. At Echo 9, the object had lingered longer. And one of the security personnel had tried to approach it. He was found unconscious, his body showing the same elevated white blood cell count that Morrison and his team had developed. But worse, his skin had turned gray, his hair had fallen out, and he wasn't responding to any medical treatment. By dawn, 6 of White Sands' 8 nuclear missile installations had been systematically disarmed. The warheads were intact, but inert. Their plutonium cores surgically extracted by entities that shouldn't exist, using technology we couldn't understand. We were herded back to the underground facility. The base was on full lockdown now. Jets scrambled, radar stations on maximum alert, every available soldier mobilized. But what were we defending against? You can't shoot something that can disable nuclear weapons from the sky. You can't negotiate with something that doesn't respond to any form of communication. That afternoon, more officials arrived from Washington. Men in dark suits who spoke in hushed tones and carried briefcases stamped with classification levels I'd never seen before. They interviewed us again, separately, asking the same questions we'd answered 3 times already. But this time, they added new questions. Did the entities seem hostile? Did you feel threatened? Do you believe they intend to attack? I didn't know how to answer. The entities hadn't hurt us directly. They'd disabled our weapons, yes, but they hadn't launched them. They'd taken our plutonium cores, but left the warheads otherwise intact. It was almost like they were disarming us, removing our ability to destroy ourselves. But why? That night, lying in my bunk in the underground facility, I heard it again. That pressure in my mind. Not words, not images, but a presence. Reaching out, making contact, trying to communicate something my human brain couldn't quite grasp. And with it came a feeling, not threat, not hostility, warning. Something was coming. Something worse than what we'd already seen. And these entities, whatever they were, wherever they came from, weren't our enemy. They were trying to save us from something we couldn't even imagine yet. The interrogations continued for 7 days. Different officials, different questions, but always the same underlying purpose. Damage control. Not understanding what had happened, not preventing it from happening again. Just controlling the narrative, burying the truth so deep that even those of us who'd lived through it would start to question our own memories. On the 8th day, I was summoned to a conference room I'd never seen before. Deep underground, access through security checkpoints that required retinal scans and palm prints. The walls were lined with lead, and I could feel the weight of earth and concrete pressing down from above. Captain Henry Wallace was there, along with Mr. Harrison from Project Blue Book, but there were others now, a 2-star general whose name I never learned. A woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Bradford, no relation to Colonel Bradford, and a man in a dark suit who never gave his name at all. Sergeant Morrison, the general began. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest possible level. Revelation of this information to any unauthorized person will result in immediate court-martial and imprisonment. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Good. He nodded to Dr. Bradford, who opened a folder containing what looked like dozens of photographs and documents. What you experienced at Socorro was not an isolated incident, she said. We've been tracking similar encounters since 1947. Roswell wasn't a weather balloon. It was a retrieval operation. Since then, there have been over 300 documented cases of unidentified craft in United States airspace. Most are brief sightings, easily dismissed. But some, she paused, some involve direct interaction with military installations. She spread photographs across the table. I recognized some of the locations: Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming, Kirtland in New Mexico, all nuclear facilities, all showing the same type of damage we'd seen at White Sands. Missile systems disabled, security compromised, plutonium cores missing. They're systematically disarming our nuclear arsenal, the general said, and we're powerless to stop them. Who are they? I asked. Where are they from? The man in the dark suit spoke for the first time. His voice was flat, emotionless, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized long ago. We don't know. Extraterrestrial is the most likely explanation, but we can't rule out interdimensional origin, time travelers, or something else entirely. What we do know is that they possess technology centuries, possibly millennia, beyond our current capabilities. And they're hostile? Parker asked. He'd been brought in during my interrogation, along with Officer Reynolds. That's the question, Dr. Bradford said. They're disarming us, yes, but they're not destroying the weapons. They're not attacking our personnel. In fact, aside from some radiation-like symptoms in witnesses, they've caused no direct harm. The man in the silo, I protested. Echo 9. He's dying. He approached the craft despite orders to maintain distance. His exposure was prolonged and direct. Harrison pulled out another photograph. But even he is stabilizing. Whatever effect the craft's energy field has on human biology, it's temporary. Painful, debilitating, but not fatal. So what do they want? Reynolds asked. The room fell silent. These people, with all their clearances and classified information and decades of study, had no answer to the most basic question. Finally, the general spoke. Based on analysis of their behavior patterns, our best assessment is that they're preventing us from using nuclear weapons, whether to protect themselves, to protect us from ourselves, or for some other reason we can't comprehend. We don't know. But every time we've increased nuclear testing, every time we've deployed new warheads, these encounters increase in frequency and intensity. I thought about that presence I had felt in my mind, the warning. They're afraid of something, I said. When that craft was overhead, when I felt it in my head, there was fear, not of us, of something else. Dr. Bradford leaned forward. Explain. It's hard to put into words. It wasn't communication like we understand it, but the feeling was clear. They're not trying to conquer us. They're trying to stop us from doing something catastrophic, something that would affect more than just Earth. Nuclear detonations release more than just explosive force, Harrison said slowly. They tear at the fabric of space-time itself. Maybe these entities exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and our weapons damage their reality too. Or maybe, the unnamed man in the suit said, they know something we don't. Maybe nuclear war wouldn't just destroy humanity. Maybe it would destroy something larger. The implications hung in the air like radiation, invisible but deadly. What happens now? I asked. Now, the general said, we bury this. The official report will state that the Socorro incident was a misidentification of a military test vehicle. Officer Reynolds will be credited with witnessing a classified aerospace project. The missile silo incidents will be attributed to electrical malfunctions, already corrected. And you three will never speak of this again. What about the truth? Parker demanded. What about the fact that we're defenseless against these things? What about the fact that they're out there right now, doing who knows what? The truth, the man in the suit said coldly, would cause mass panic. Society would collapse. Religious institutions would fracture. Economic systems would fail. The truth is too dangerous to reveal. So we just pretend it never happened? Reynolds' voice shook with anger. You'll forget most of it anyway, Dr. Bradford said quietly. The exposure to their technology causes memory degradation. Within a few months, the details will become fuzzy. Within a year, you'll question whether it really happened at all. It's a defense mechanism, we think. The human brain protecting itself from information it can't process. I felt cold spreading through my chest. She was right. Already, some details from that first encounter near Socorro were slipping away. The exact sequence of events, the precise appearance of the entities. It was like trying to remember a dream, vivid at first, but fading with every hour that passed. What about the radiation symptoms? I asked. The elevated white blood cell counts, the man in Echo 9. You'll be monitored for the rest of your lives, Harrison said. Annual medical examinations, blood work, tissue samples, all under the guise of routine military health screening. If any long-term effects manifest, we'll know. And if they come back, Parker asked, if they hit more silos, then we'll continue to document, analyze, and attempt to understand. The general stood, signaling the meeting was over. But we will not reveal the truth to the public. That decision has been made at the highest levels of government, with input from international intelligence agencies. The world is not ready to know that we're not alone, and that we're powerless against what's out there. We were dismissed, escorted back to our quarters. 3 days later, we were released from lockdown, with orders to return to normal duty. As though anything could ever be normal again. The official Project Blue Book report on the Socorro incident was filed on May 8, 1964. I saw it years later, after it was declassified. It listed the case as unidentified, but offered numerous conventional explanations that anyone with half a brain could see didn't fit the evidence: swamp gas, weather balloon, temperature inversion, the usual dismissive garbage. Officer Reynolds returned to Socorro and continued his career in law enforcement. He gave interviews over the years, always maintaining that what he'd seen was real. Most people dismissed him as an attention seeker or someone suffering from delusions. He died in 1993, still insisting on the truth of his encounter. Parker was transferred to a different base 6 months later. I heard he developed severe anxiety and depression, requiring psychiatric treatment. He was honorably discharged in 1966 with a medical disability. I lost track of him after that. I stayed in the Air Force for another 12 years, earning promotions, serving with distinction. But I was never the same. The headaches started about 6 months after the incident. Not constant, but recurring. Sharp, stabbing pains behind my eyes that no medication could touch. The doctors found nothing wrong. The memory problems got worse. Not just the details of the encounter, but everything. I'd forget conversations, lose track of time, wake up with no memory of how I'd gotten somewhere. My service record noted it, but I was too valuable to discharge. I knew too much. They needed to keep me where they could watch me. In 1976, I was called back to that underground facility, the same conference room, though Dr. Bradford was gone now. In her place was a younger scientist who introduced himself as Dr. Robert Hayes. "We need to update your medical file," he explained. "There have been developments." He showed me reports from other witnesses, military personnel who'd encountered similar craft over the years. The pattern was consistent: elevated white blood cell counts, memory issues, chronic headaches, and in some cases, something else: enhanced abilities, heightened intuition, occasional flashes of precognition. "We believe the exposure altered your neurology in subtle ways," Hayes said. "The entity's technology operates on principles we still don't understand, but it appears to affect human consciousness directly. Some witnesses report increased empathy, the ability to sense others' emotions. Others develop mathematical abilities they never had before." "What happened to me?" I asked. He pulled out my medical file. It was thick, decades of tests and observations. "You show elevated activity in the prefrontal cortex, higher than normal pattern recognition. And according to your psych evaluations, you've been having dreams. Detailed, specific dreams about future events." I had been. Dreams of disasters before they happened. Small things mostly. A car accident on a specific road. A building fire. Nothing I could prove, nothing I could prevent, but accurate enough to be deeply unsettling. "Are we changing?" I asked. "Is the exposure transforming us into something else?" "We don't know, but we're monitoring everyone who's had close encounters. Long-term studies, tracking any changes over decades." He paused. "The effects appear to be permanent, and possibly hereditary. We're watching the children of witnesses now." My daughter, born in 1965, a year after Socorro, brilliant, intuitive, with an IQ that put her in the genius range. Was that natural? Or had my exposure to that craft's energy field affected my DNA, changed something fundamental that I'd passed on to her? I retired from the Air Force in 1978 with full honors. My service record made no mention of Socorro or the missile silo incidents. All classified, all buried, all officially non-existent. But I couldn't forget. Even as the specific details faded, the core truth remained. We were not alone. We had been contacted, assessed, and found wanting. And whatever those entities were, wherever they came from, they were still out there, still watching, still disarming our nuclear weapons. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. The Cold War ended. The threat of nuclear annihilation that had defined my entire adult life simply evaporated. Was that natural political evolution? Or had those entities been working behind the scenes, influencing events, pushing humanity away from the brink of self-destruction? I'll never know for certain. What I do know is that between 1964 and 1967, there were over 60 documented encounters at nuclear facilities worldwide, not just in the United States. Russia, China, Britain, France. Every nation with nuclear weapons experienced similar incidents. Missiles disabled, plutonium cores missing, security personnel reporting strange craft and small entities, and every government responded the same way. Deny, dismiss, bury the truth. Project Blue Book was officially closed in 1969. Its mission declared complete. The official conclusion: UFOs pose no threat to national security and showed no evidence of extraterrestrial technology. Anyone who'd followed the cases knew this was a lie, but the lie became official history. I'm 73 years old now. The headaches never stopped. The memory problems got worse with age, until I can barely remember what I did yesterday. But Socorro remains vivid. That egg-shaped craft, those small entities, the symbol pressed into the desert floor, the presence in my mind. Sometimes, late at night, I still feel it. that presence, reaching out across whatever vast distance separates us, not threatening, watching, waiting. For what? I don't know. But I have a theory, one I've never shared with the doctors or the intelligence agencies that still monitor me. The entities didn't just disarm our nuclear weapons in the 1960s. They left something behind. In the plutonium cores they removed. In the minds of those of us they contacted. In the very fabric of reality around the sites they visited. Seeds, maybe, or markers, or warning beacons. Something that would activate if humanity ever came close to nuclear war again. Something that would prevent us from crossing that line, no matter how close we came. I think they're still out there, in ships we can't see, watching from places we can't imagine. And if we ever develop weapons even more destructive than nuclear bombs, if we ever threaten not just ourselves, but the larger reality they inhabit, they'll come back. Not to conquer, not to destroy, to disarm us again, to save us from ourselves. Whether we want to be saved or not. The truth about Socorro, about the missile silos, about all the encounters over the decades, remains classified. The files are locked away in facilities deep underground, accessible only to those with clearances so high that most government officials don't even know they exist. But the truth has a way of emerging, piece by piece, witnesses coming forward as they approach the end of their lives, no longer afraid of consequences. Documents being declassified, redacted but still revealing, patterns becoming visible. When you step back and look at the larger picture, we are not alone. We have never been alone, and the entities that share this universe with us are far more concerned with our nuclear weapons than they are with making formal first contact. Maybe that should tell us something about how dangerous we really are, not just to ourselves, but to the larger cosmic community we don't even know we're part of. I'm writing this now because I'm dying cancer, the doctors say, probably related to the radiation exposure from Socorro, though they can't prove it. I have maybe 6 months left, and I'm tired of keeping secrets. The government will probably confiscate this document, classify it, bury it alongside all the other evidence they've suppressed for 60 years. But maybe, just maybe, someone will read it first. Someone will ask questions. Someone will demand the truth, because the truth matters. What happened at Socorro in April 1964 was real. The entities were real. The disarmament of our nuclear missiles was real. And the implications are staggering. We stand at a crossroads as a species. We can continue down the path of weapons development, of mutually assured destruction, of technologies that threaten not just Earth, but the fabric of space-time itself. Or we can choose differently. The entities from Socorro gave us a chance. They disarmed us without destroying us. They showed us that our weapons are meaningless against truly advanced technology. They demonstrated that we're not the apex predators we think we are. Now it's up to us to decide what we do with that knowledge. Will we learn? Will we evolve? Will we join the larger cosmic community as peaceful, mature beings? Or will we continue to build bigger weapons, create greater threats, force those entities to return and disarm us again? I hope I live long enough to see humanity make the right choice. But I'm not holding my breath. The truth about Socorro is that we were given a warning, a clear, unmistakable message that our nuclear weapons cross a line we don't even understand, a line that affects more than just our planet. Whether we heed that warning or not will determine whether humanity has a future among the stars, or whether we remain quarantined on this small blue planet, too dangerous to be trusted with anything beyond our own atmosphere. I've spent 50 years carrying this secret. 50 years watching the government lie about what happened. 50 years knowing the truth and being powerless to reveal it. Not anymore. This is my testimony. This is the truth. This is what really happened at Socorro, New Mexico on April 24th, 1964. Believe it or don't. Accept it or dismiss it. But know that somewhere above you, right now, they're watching, waiting, ready to intervene if we threaten to cross that line again. And next time, they might not be so gentle.